What's good, YouTube? We're back here again today with Fantasy Football Week 6 rankings. Today we're going to talk about the running backs in PPR leagues and standard leagues. Before we get into the video, please do leave a like, comment, subscribe, especially if this video helped you out. So let's focus in on PPR leagues and then we'll work our way into standard leagues. So number one, I have Saquon Barkley against the Ravens. Third ranked running back on the year, averaging 21.1 points in fantasy PPR leagues, while the Ravens give up about 22.6 points to running backs. Saquon's been looking amazing so far this year, really playing like his old self. I don't expect that to stop against the Ravens, especially when the Giants rely so much on Saquon to really get them going. At number two, I have McCaffrey against the Rams, fifth ranked running back on the year, averaging about 19 points, and the Rams allow 15.58 points to running backs. A little bit of a tougher matchup for McCaffrey, but if Baker Mayfield does not play, the Panthers are probably going to rely really heavily on McCaffrey. So I kind of expect him to get a huge workload and really produce numbers this week. Austin Ekeler at number three against the Broncos, the number one running back on the year so far, 22.7 points in PPR leagues, while the Broncos give up 19.46 points to running backs. Another tough matchup here for Ekeler. However, he has been really ridiculous as of late, and I don't really expect him to stop, especially with Keenan Allen still out. Like I said all year, the Chargers really need to use Ekeler as much as they can in order to be effective on offense, and they've been doing just that, so I don't expect this to stop for Ekeler. Nick Chubb at number four, second ranked running back on the year, 22.2 points a game, and the Patriots give up 18.12. Nick Chubb is going to continue doing Nick Chubb things. He's been a workhorse so far in the year. Cleveland has been really relying on him heavily. They rely on Kareem Hunt too, but obviously Nick Chubb is the go-to guy for them, and he's shown that he's going to be a monster this entire season. I see no signs of him slowing down either. Leonard Fournette at number five had a huge game last week against the Steelers this week, seventh ranked running back on the year, averaging about 18.3 points in PPR leagues, while the Steelers give up about 22.7. He's going to be a big target for Brady. Between him, Mike Evans, Godwin, there's a lot of passes to go around, and Fournette has become a great pass catcher over the past couple of years, and really someone that Brady can rely on for checkdowns, short yardage. So Fournette is going to be a monster in PPR leagues, a little bit more so than standard leagues, although he does get a lot of rushing attempts. At number six, we have Alvin Kamara against the Bengals, 45th ranked running back on the year, averages only 12.8 points a game, while the Bengals give about 17.2 points to running backs. Kamara had himself a good week last week, obviously overshadowed by Taysom Hill's crazy performance, but Kamara is going to be New Orleans' guy, especially while Mike Thomas is out. Chris Olave suffered a concussion, so he may not play. Jameis Winston, no return on him yet. So if Andy Dalton does start, I expect him to lean heavily on Kamara, really utilize Kamara's skill set just to get the Saints going on offense. Dalvin Cook at number seven against the Dolphins, 14th ranked running back on the year, averages about 14.3 points a game, while the Dolphins give up 26 points to running backs. Dalvin Cook's in line for a huge game. The Dolphins offense is a little bit questionable right now, especially with Bridgewater missing last game. They were down to the third string quarterback who didn't play well. Jalen Waddle barely got the ball. Tyreek couldn't really get much done either. However, Mostert and Edmonds did do pretty decently. I do expect Minnesota to go up early against the Dolphins, especially if Bridgewater is playing. I think it might be a little bit more competitive, but if he's not and the third string quarterback's under center, I think Dalvin Cook and the Vikings are going to have a field day. Jonathan Taylor at number 8 against Jacksonville Jaguars, 31st ranked running back on the year, averaging 12.6 points a game, while the Jaguars give up about 25.5 points to running backs. The Colts have been a mess offensively. I kind of attribute most of it to Jonathan Taylor's kind of poor play, mostly the offensive line. Actually, I think Jonathan Taylor just isn't finding the holes right now because the line isn't creating any, and he did miss last week because of his high ankle injury. No word yet if he's going to play this week or not. Obviously, if he doesn't play, he's going to fall out the rankings. But if he does play, this is a nice game for him to really bounce back on the year. Really been struggling. He was a consensus number one pick almost throughout, I'd say almost all leagues. Maybe you could make an argument for McCaffrey or Ekeler, but Most people took Taylor number 1, and this is really the game for him to bounce back. Indiana really needs him. The offense has been looking atrocious. The wide receivers can't get going because no run game being established. Hines got injured last week, so the Colts are really a mess, and they really need to figure it out, and they got to do it soon. Joe Mixon at number 9 against the Saints, 15th ranked running back on the year, almost 14 points a game, while the Saints give up about 19 points to running backs. Joe Mixon is a mainstay of the top 10 weekly rankings. I feel like whether it's draft day or weekly rankings, Joe Mixon's always in the top 10, top 12 at least. And it's going to be another good matchup for him. T. Higgins did get injured. No word if he's going to play this week as of right now. I do expect him to play, but the more receivers they have available, the better of a game I think Mixon will have, just because they can't really load the box against Mixon. So he should be in line for a pretty decent game against the Saints, especially if the Bengals do take the lead early. The Saints do have a tough defense, so it may be a little bit tougher for Joe Burrow to get going, but I do expect a big game for the Bengals. At number 10, we have Breece Hall against the Packers. Had a huge game last week. 9th ranked running back on the year, averaging about 16.4 points in PPR leagues, while the Packers allowed 22.1 points to opposing running backs. Breece Hall was amazing last week. His backfield mate of Michael Carter I have ranked number 31, averaging 11 points a game, the 23rd ranked running back on the year. However, Breece Hall has shown that he's definitely the guy in New Jersey. He's produced a huge game. He's always been relevant in the passing game, getting a huge amount of targets for a running back. Last week had a 79-yard run, fell in the 1-yard line. That could have been a straight-up 80-yard touchdown, which would have boosted Breece Hall's day even more. He also had another 29 or 20-yard catch that also fell in the 1-yard line. And Michael Carter vultured that TD as well. He did eventually get in the end zone. Did have almost 200 yards from scrimmage. I think he just barely missed the rushing yards. But huge game. I really think it was his coming out party. And I think Breece Hall is definitely a running back 2 week in and week out, and could compete for a running back 1 some weeks. Aaron Jones, number 11 against the Jets. 13th ranked running back on the year. Averages about 14.6 points, while the Jets give up 22.5 points to opposing running backs. And A.J. Dillon I have ranked at number 27, 33rd ranked running back on the year, 9.3 points. I do think Aaron Jones has to step it up a little bit. Green Bay's wide receivers have kind of gotten going over the past few weeks, whether it's Romeo Doubs, Alan Lazard, or Randall Cobb. They've really been getting good work from the receivers. Now, Aaron Jones is always going to be a receiving threat out of the backfield as well as A.J. Dillon. They're both great runners and great receivers. So I do think, like I said every week, I think the Green Bay offense really revolves around the 2 running backs. And as they go, the Green Bay offense will go. And this should be a pretty good game for the Green Bay offense, especially against the Jets, allowing so many points to opposing running backs. Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon can really have a pretty good game this week. At number 12, we have Ramondre Stevenson against the Browns. 18th ranked running back on the year, 12.7 points a game, while the Browns average about 30 points to opposing wide receivers. At number 12, we have Ramondre Stevenson against the Cleveland Browns. 18th ranked running back on the year, averaging about 12.7 points a game, and the Browns give up about 29.1 points to opposing running backs. Another player that had a huge jump since last week, Damian Harris, got injured, will likely miss some games, and Ramondre Stevenson went off last week. 161 yards rushing, and also had 2 catches for 14 yards. Ramondre Stevenson was always their third down back. He got most of the pass catching work done. Now he has the ability to get basically a bell cow role in New England while Damian Harris is out, and last week showed that he really could handle that workload. Expect a huge game from him, especially since Cleveland gives up a lot of points to running backs. It's a good week to be a Ramondre Stevenson owner. Miles Sanders at number 13 against the Dallas Cowboys, 12th ranked running back on the year, about 15 fantasy points a game, while the Cowboys give up 18 points to running backs. Tough defensive matchup in this game. Philly and Dallas, both great defensive teams. I do see Miles Sanders has kind of been the mainstay of the Philly offense along with Jalen Hurts. He's always going to be involved in the rushing game since Philly uses it so heavily. and he's a great pass catcher out of the backfield, so really boosts his value in PPR leagues. He missed out on a touchdown last week, but he's been pretty good with touchdowns this year. Even when he's not producing touchdowns, Miles Sanders always does find a way to contribute, at least in yardage or catches. So he's still a reliable running back, at least this week. However, I would temper expectations just a little bit, just because the Dallas defense is so good. At number 14, we have Clyde Edwards-Helaire against the Bills. 8th ranked running back on the year, averages about 16.4 fantasy points a game, while the Bills give up about 19 to running backs. Another tough matchup for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. He really couldn't get it going last week against the Raiders, especially since the Chiefs were down heavily. I do think he is a solid contributor this year. I was down on him early in the year, especially because of Jerick McKinnon and Isaiah Pacheco. And McKinnon was used heavily last week. Definitely looked like the better runner last week, but Clyde Edwards-Helaire is always going to be, I would say, their number 1 running back, and McKinnon kind of a change of pace running back. And then Pacheco, really, when the game gets out of hand, he might step in. But I do expect Helaire to be a little bit more productive against Buffalo, but I do know how good of a defense Buffalo has. So I would also temper expectations this week, but he's still a solid player throughout the year. At number 15, we have Jeff Wilson Jr. against the Falcons, 19th ranked running back on the year, about 12.5 fantasy points a game, while the Falcons give up about 24 to running backs. This is a great matchup for Jeff Wilson Jr., especially if the 49ers get off to a hot start, grab an early lead against an Atlanta team struggling to score right now. I really think that the 49ers are going to continue to pound the ball and really just let Jeff Wilson, Deebo Samuel, and their runners really carry the work this week. At number 16, Melvin Gordon against the Chargers, 39th ranked running back on the year, 8.4 points, while the Chargers give up about 32 points to opposing running backs. I do also have Mike Boone at number 39, averages about 4.2 a game. However, last week, I think in PPR leagues, scored 10 points. At number 16, we have Melvin Gordon against the Chargers, 39th ranked running back on the year, averaging about 8.4 fantasy points a game, while the Chargers give up a whopping 32 points to running backs. I do also have Mike Boone at number 39, averaging about 4.2 points. However, last week he did have a better game, I think scoring 10 points in PPR leagues. Russell Wilson is a little banged up, might affect his throwing. I believe it's in his throwing shoulder that he messed up as well. Really could affect his passing game, and the Broncos might rely heavily on the run this week, especially since the Chargers seem to be very weak against the run. It could really be beneficial for Melvin Gordon and Mike Boone owners. I do think Melvin Gordon is the better running back as of right now, but Mike Boone has the potential to be the starting running back as the year closes. At number 17, we have Ken Walker III against the Cardinals, 52nd ranked running back on the year, about 7 fantasy PPR points a game, while the Cardinals allowed 20 points to running backs. Another huge jump in the running back department. Rashad Penny is likely out for the season. Ken Walker is going to be the main workhorse back for Seattle now. Previously, Rashad Penny handled most of the third down back, really dominated the touches, bringing in Ken Walker for some passing work. Now Ken Walker could really be that bell cow running back. There is DJ Dallas. Travis Homer is still out, but Ken Walker is really going to dominate the touches going forward for Seattle. And they have been pretty good. Geno Smith's shown that he could be a good quarterback with the right weapons around him. Lockett and Metcalf played a great game last week as well. Ken Walker, I think last week had about 88 yards and a touchdown, ran for a huge 49-yard touchdown, I believe. But the Seahawks really got away from the run, being down against the Saints. There was really a lot of throwing going on in that game, and they ultimately fell short of winning, but it really bodes well for Ken Walker's value. Kareem Hunt at number 18 against the Patriots, 17th ranked running back on the year, 13 points a game, while the Patriots give about 18 points. Just like with Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt is always going to be effective in fantasy, especially in PPR leagues, with Cleveland especially relying so much on the run. They do have Amari Cooper, Donovan Peoples-Jones, and Njoku, all of whom are playing pretty good. Njoku especially, I think. Cooper has been a little hit or miss this year, but Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb have been really reliable for the Cleveland offense. Don't expect them to stray away from that. At number 19, a huge fall for Najee Harris. He's just been dropping crazily throughout the weeks. This week against Tampa Bay, a tough defense, 27th ranked running back on the year, averaging about 10 points, while Tampa Bay only allows about 16.5 points to running backs. Most people drafted Najee Harris in the first round, and to see your first round running back play so poorly for 5 weeks now is pretty unfortunate. If he continues to keep falling down the rankings, it's hard to even trade him, honestly, if you own him, just because no one's really going to want to buy him. But you kind of just have to hope that he really bounces back, especially with Kenny Pickett under center. It didn't seem like it last week, and it doesn't seem like he's going to bounce back this week either. James Conner at number 20 against the Seahawks, the 30th ranked running back on the year, averages about 10 points a game, while the Seahawks give up about 28 points to running backs. So James Conner is another one that's been falling over the course of the year. I do think it's mostly because the Cardinals have just been down almost every game, and they're really requiring to throw to really catch up and be competitive. A lot of that could be because DeAndre Hopkins is out, but the run game really hasn't been able to get established throughout the games. I do think Conner is much better than his 30th ranked running back on the year, and Seattle's a good game to at least bounce back against, since they do allow a lot of points to running backs. However, again, if Arizona falls behind, they are really going to start slinging the ball, really affecting James Conner's rushing attempts. However, he's still effective in the passing game. At number 21, we have J.K. Dobbins against the Giants, 47th ranked running back on the year, averaging about 10.9 fantasy points a game, while the Giants give about 20 points to opposing running backs. J.K. Dobbins came back from his injury kind of red hot, scored about 4 touchdowns in those 2 games, or I think 3 touchdowns in those 2 games, and he was looking like he was going to be a fantasy monster. However, last week only had 44 yards, I think only 8 rush attempts. 8 rush attempts, no catches. Lamar Jackson really dominated the rushing attempts with 12 for 58 yards. I do think when you own a Baltimore running back, Lamar is probably your worst enemy, just because he runs the ball so well, so fast, that they really game plan for Lamar to get open. And they do have so many deep threats with Mark Andrews, Duvernay, Rashad Bateman. It's a little tough owning a Baltimore running back, but when the Baltimore run game is going strong, it's amazing. So I do see J.K. Dobbins having a little bit more boom or bust potential. In this week, last week it was a bust, at least in my terms. But there's could be multiple games where he has multiple touchdowns. So J.K. Dobbins is a pretty valuable asset. However, I would be wary starting him just because of Lamar's running ability. At number 22, David Montgomery against the Washington Commanders, 38th running back on the year, about 10.7 points a game, while the Commanders allowed 22.7 points a game to opposing running backs. Did return from injury, however did not play well, only had 20 yards and a touchdown, so not bad. Also had 4 catches for 62 yards. That's what really boosted up his points in PPR leagues at least. David Montgomery returned from injury last week, played okay, ran the ball 12 times for 20 yards and a touchdown, and also caught the ball 4 times for 62 yards, really boosting his PPR value. Khalil Herbert, who I believe I have ranked at 36, 20th ranked running back on the year, 12 points, had only 11 yards on 4 carries with no catches. So as long as David Montgomery is active, Khalil Herbert will not be used. We've seen what Herbert can do when Montgomery's not playing, so they could become a dynamic backfield. However, the Bears shown that they will rely heavily on David Montgomery, whether he's running the ball well or not. They also have Justin Fields capable of running the ball, who had 47 yards on 8 carries last week. So the Bears do have a pretty decent matchup against the Commanders on Thursday, but I think David Montgomery has still a lot of better football to play. The Bears have been awful. I really do expect David Montgomery to kind of bounce back. I'm still hoping Darnell Mooney bounces back, just because I did think he was going to have a good year, but it's looking a little unlikely at this point. James Robinson at number 23 against the Colts, 16th ranked running back on the year, 13 points a game with 22.7 points given up by the Colts. The Jags had a pretty embarrassing loss to Houston last week. James Robinson only had 10 carries for 27 yards, wasn't effective in the passing game, only 2 catches for 12 yards. And Travis Etienne, who I have at number 29, is actually finding his way, gaining more and more touches. He had 10 carries, 71 yards, so outran James Robinson by a good amount. And he also had 3 catches for 43 yards, so total yards of scrimmage dominated by Travis Etienne. I did think he was going to be a great pickup this year. However, James Robinson always finds a way being rostered, and I do think it's coming to the point where Travis Etienne is slowly overtaking James Robinson, really resulting in the fall of James Robinson, at least for this year. At number 24, Ezekiel Elliott against the Eagles, 37th ranked running back on the year, 8.8 fantasy points a game, while the Eagles only allow about 22 points to running backs. I do also have Tony Pollard at number 28, who actually outscored Zeke so far in the year, 10.2 fantasy points a game. And Zeke and Pollard, they're going to be the 1-2 punch, at least for the Dallas running game. However, they both have not been amazingly effective. Pollard did have a huge run last week, and that was where the majority of his points came from. And Elliott never really got it going on the ground. Zeke and Tony Pollard are going to be the 1-2 punch for the Dallas run game. Tony Pollard did have a huge rushing touchdown last week. I think it was 50-ish yards or 40 yards touchdown. That's where the bulk of his points came from. Meanwhile, Ezekiel Elliott rushed 22 times for 78 yards, and Pollard had 86 yards on his 8 carries. They both were not effective in the passing game, but Cooper Rush only did throw like 16 times last week, being up so heavily against the Rams. I do think that Elliott and Pollard are going to be used a little bit more often than last week. Well, they were used pretty heavily last week, but I do think they're going to be used more often in the passing game than last week, just because Dallas has been saying Tony Pollard they're going to use a lot. And Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard have lined up together so many times. I just don't know if I would like having Zeke or Pollard as my even running back 2 at this point. I think Zeke might be in flex conversation. He's been really disappointing. Maybe when Dak comes back, he'll pick it up a little bit. But Cooper Rush has shown that he's more reliant on his receivers than the run game. At number 25, we have Raheem Mostert against the Vikings, 34th ranked running back on the year, about 9.1 points a game, while the Vikings give up 24.68 points to opposing running backs. And I do also have Chase Edmonds at number 41 down here, averaging about 8.3 points a game. Raheem Mostert really dominated the touches last week. Even while being down, he had 18 carries for 113 yards and a touchdown. Meanwhile, also I believe 1 catch for 9 yards. Meanwhile, Chase Edmonds wasn't used at all last week. I did think that he's a much better play when the Dolphins are down, which they were last week. However, he only had 1 rush for 1 yard and no catches. So Raheem Mostert is slowly taking over that starting role. I do think he is the better runner, but I still believe that Chase Edmonds is the better pass catcher. So unfortunately for the Dolphins, they were down to their 3rd string quarterback, probably resulted in them relying on Mostert so much more. And it really shown to affect that Teddy Bridgewater should be back this week, kind of booting up the Miami Dolphins offense. Again, they got smoked by the Jets, I think 40-17. They really had a tough outing last week, and I do expect Miami to bounce back against Minnie. And again, if they do go down, I do expect Chase Edmonds to get a lot more work. But if they're in the lead, I think Raheem Mostert is their guy. At 26, we have Devin Singletary against the Kansas City Chiefs, 25th ranked running back on the year, about 11 fantasy points a game, while the Chiefs give up a whopping 30 points to running backs. Now, this is most likely because of Josh Jacobs dominating the Chiefs on Monday. They're a pretty good run defense. Prior to Monday, they were, I think, 3rd in the league preventing fantasy points, but they're definitely falling off now. Buffalo's pass catchers are so amazing that I think they're going to rely more on the passing game to just go all-out offense against the Kansas City Chiefs and beat them that way. The Chiefs have shown that the way to beat them is through the run game over the past few years. However, Buffalo's run game isn't anything spectacular with Singletary. He's still pretty effective along with Josh Allen, but there was talks of Buffalo getting CMC through a trade, which would be absolutely nuts. They would probably have the greatest offense I've ever seen, and that would be nuts. CMC would probably do better if he got traded to Buffalo. I mean, 100% would do better just because he's getting passes from Josh Allen now, and they have to worry about Diggs, Gabe Davis. They also have to worry about Isaiah McKenzie, Dawson Knox. So really opens up for CMC. It will probably be a big boost for his fantasy value, but Devin Singletary obviously would just get shut out if CMC was there. Pretty good play this week. We spoke about AJ Dillon, Tony Pollard, and Travis Etienne. Moving on to Cam Akers at number 30 against the Panthers, 57th ranked running back on the year, 4.6 points. while the Panthers give up 26 points to opposing running backs. I do also have Darrell Henderson at number 34, averaging about 7.7 points. Against the Cowboys last week, Cam Akers had 13 rushes for 33 yards, so not super effective. However, Henderson didn't even get a rush attempt. He did have 4 catches, though, for 30 yards, actually outscoring Cam Akers. But the rush game has leaned more toward Cam Akers. This backfield is another one that worries me, like Raheem, Mostert, and Chase Edmonds. I feel like they flip-flop week in and week out, but I would give the edge to Cam Akers for the rest of the season. However, Darrell Henderson can just swoop in and take it anytime. We already talked about Michael Carter, so we'll move on to number 32, Tyler Algier of the Falcons. Against the 49ers, very tough defense, 57th ranked running back, only averages 5.7 points a game, while the 49ers allow just 19 points to opposing running backs. Against the Buccaneers, Algier rushed 13 times for 45 yards, another tough run defense. And now going into facing the 49ers, I expect another tough week for him or Huntley, who I have at number 47, averaging about 5 points on the year as well. Their run game really suffered with Cordell Patterson on IR. Not sure how long he will be out. Tyler Algier is definitely the back you want to own in Atlanta. Caleb Huntley did have 8 carries for 34 yards. No catches either. They were both kind of mid in my opinion. I do think Tyler Algier deserves the roster spot more though. At number 33, Nyheim Hines against the Jaguars, 49th ranked running back on the year, 6.2 points a game, while the Jaguars give up 26 points to opposing running backs. Unfortunately, Hines got injured last week with the concussion. If Jonathan Taylor does miss this week again, I'm not sure if Hines is playing either. So Indiana is going to be in a big problem. Probably have to rely a lot on Philip Lindsay, who I have just outside of my top 50. But if they do both play, obviously Jonathan Taylor is going to get his. If Jonathan Taylor does miss work, I think Nyheim Hines could really jump up the charts. At number 35, we have Eno Benjamin against the Seahawks, 43rd ranked running back on the year, averages about 8.3 points a game, while the Seahawks give up about 28 points. Again, if James Conner does miss time, I think Eno Benjamin can really have a good game here. There is issues with the Cardinals running game, which I talked about earlier. They just haven't been able to get it going, but with Conner out, they're really going to have to rely heavily on Benjamin to produce something. We spoke about Khalil Herbert, but we'll move on to number 37, Antonio Gibson against the Chicago Bears, 21st ranked running back on the year, averaging just about 11.9 fantasy points a game, while the Bears give about 25 points. And I also do have Brian Robinson not too far below him at number 40 against the Bears, 2.2 points a game. Obviously didn't play many games this year. 25 points allowed by the Bears. And then I still have another running back for Washington, J.D. McKissic, 32nd ranked running back, 9.7 points a game, just behind Antonio Gibson. So this running back trio is going to be something to watch. Gibson started off the year pretty good. We all know what happened to Brian Robinson. J.D. McKissic has been a usual third down passing back. But going into last week, Brian Robinson had 9 carries for 22 yards. Carson Wentz was second on the team with 15 yards on 5 carries. And Antonio Gibson only rushed the ball 3 times for 6 yards. Gibson did have 3 catches for 33 yards. And J.D. McKissic had 5 catches for 37 yards. And Brian Robinson wasn't really used in the passing game. But there's a lot of confusion here. Will Brian Robinson be their main first and second down back? Is Gibson going to be the third down back, or is it going to be J.D. McKissic? So a lot of questions about these three running backs. Right now, obviously, if you do have Brian Robinson, I think he's probably the better roster spot at this point. I think Antonio Gibson's value is going to plummet, especially if Brian Robinson is getting most of the rushing attempts. Rachaad White back up to Leonard Fournette against the Steelers at number 38. Averages about 5.2 points a game. Brady does use Rachaad White here and there when Leonard Fournette takes his rest. He's a great pass catching back, really versatile. Last week ran the ball 5 times for 14 yards, but also had 3 catches for 28 yards. So really turning himself into a nice third down back. Rachaad White can prove a little value in deeper leagues or possibly even a double flex league. So he's someone to keep an eye out. We spoke about Boone, Brian Robinson, Edmonds, but Jerick McKinnon, I believe we spoke about him as well, but he really got a bulk of the work, I think, last week. Definitely was more effective if he didn't get the bulk of it. Whenever he was on the field, he was targeted, used in some way or another. So Jerick McKinnon does hold value in Kansas City, I think. However, just more lower end value because I still think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is their guy. Samaje Perine of the Bengals against the Saints. Backup for Joe Mixon, about 6.5 fantasy points a game. Another third down passing back here as we enter what I like to call handcuff city between Samaje, Madison, Gainwell, Caleb Huntley, I guess, Joshua Kelly, Mark Ingram, and Isaiah Pacheco. I think these are some must-have backups you should have on your fantasy football team. And really, they make up the ladder of the rankings. I guess you could include Jerick McKinnon in this too. In any given week, if the starters get hurt, they are going to boost up the rankings like crazy. McKinnon might even hit top 20. Madison definitely will hit top 20. Gainwell will probably hit top 20. Joshua Kelly maybe. Mark Ingram probably not. McKissick, no, because obviously Brian Robinson and Antonio Gibson. But all of the rest could show huge value if their starters do get injured. So let's take a look at standard leagues and just talk about some of the differences. In standard leagues, I do have Chubb number 1. Just been a dominant force all year long. Without the PPR points, he definitely outweighs Saquon Barkley, McCaffrey, and Eckler in my opinion. Leonard Fournette is still top 5 this week. Other players that do get a little bit more of a bump, and Jonathan Taylor. Kamara takes a little bit of a hit here. So does Aaron Jones. Ramondre Stevenson is going to have a huge week. We talked about how many yards he had. Going to be the bell cow. Miles Sanders takes a little hit here. Hilaire kinda. Ken Walker probably not. Raheem Mostert gets a big boost here just because Chase Edmonds really relies on the pass catching while Raheem Mostert is just a monster running back. James Robinson, still very worried about him in standard leagues as well, but he does get a little bit of a boost over Travis Etienne here for now. We'll see how long that lasts. James Conner takes a huge hit. Zeke is probably around the same area. Algier gets a little boost. Cam Akers gets the boost over Henderson here. And I have Tony Pollard just a little bit lower than Zeke as well. In PPR leagues, Tony Pollard probably holds a little bit more value, even though he's outscoring Zeke so far in the year, which is crazy to think. Most of that came from that huge play last week, though. Michael Carter takes a huge fall here. Breece Hall has been dominant so far. Well, has been dominant in terms of touches for the Jets, really showing that he is the guy for them. And Michael Carter has been getting less and less touches throughout the weeks. He's more of a change of pace back at this point, in my opinion at least. He's still a solid running back. Definitely going to get used just because the Jets rely so heavily on him. Brian Robinson gets a big boost here. Obviously, the pass catching doesn't matter in standard leagues, while Antonio Gibson might actually just be relying on catching passes at this point to be relevant. So, little worried for Antonio Gibson. Very excited if I'm a Brian Robinson owner. Overall, not too much different this week. I think Benjamin gets a big jump. J.K. Dobbins gets a jump. Gordon gets a jump here as well. Jeff Wilson. But about the usual names going up and down here. Not much different this week. But that's all for this video. If you guys did enjoy, please do leave a like, comment, subscribe, especially if this video helped you out. And I'll see you tomorrow for wide receiver rankings.